Somewhere in a drawer you haven't opened in years, there's an old phone, thick, heavy, a screen the size of a stamp. You probably remember the ringtone before you remember the brand. For a while, that phone was the most trusted object on the planet. Then it wasn't. What happened to it wasn't a slow fade, it was a decision, one meeting, a handful of people in a room. And the strangest part is this: the people in that room weren't stupid, they weren't lazy. Some of them saw the future coming years before anyone else did, and they chose not to move. This is the story of Nokia and the decision nobody saw coming. Rewind to 2004. Nokia doesn't just lead the phone industry, it owns it. 4 in every 10 phones sold anywhere on Earth carry that logo. Inside the company, engineers are already sketching something that looks a lot like what you're holding right now. A touchscreen, a full browser, apps you download instead of features baked into the hardware. There's a prototype. It's real. It works. It's called the Nokia 7710, and later, more seriously, a project many insiders now refer to simply as the iPhone before the iPhone. So why does the name Nokia bring up nostalgia and not your current phone brand? Here's where the story gets uncomfortable. Nokia's engineers weren't blind. A researcher inside the company, years before Steve Jobs ever stepped on a stage in 2007, warned leadership that touchscreens and app ecosystems were the future. The prototype existed. The instinct existed. What didn't exist was permission. Nokia's internal culture ran on something that had made it rich for a decade: hardware excellence, manufacturing scale, and Symbian, its operating system. Symbian worked, Symbian sold, and when a system is working, convincing a company to blow it up is one of the hardest sales in business. You've probably felt a version of this yourself, not with a company, with a habit, a job, a relationship that technically still works. Change feels riskier than staying, even when staying is the actual risk. Harvard professor Clayton Christensen wrote about exactly this pattern in his research on disruptive innovation. Successful companies, he found, often fail, not because they ignore the future, but because they optimize too well for the present. Every incentive inside Nokia pointed backward, toward protecting what already worked, not forward, toward what might replace it. Then 2007 happens. Steve Jobs unveils the iPhone, multi-touch, no stylus. An app store 6 months later that turns the phone into a platform instead of a device. Nokia executives, according to internal accounts from that era, watched the announcement and weren't panicked. They were almost relieved. The battery life looked weak, the keyboard was gone, and typing on glass seemed impractical for serious users. Nokia had tested touchscreens for years and knew their limitations. Surely this was a toy for early adopters, not a threat to a company that shipped hundreds of millions of phones a year. That single assumption may be the most expensive misjudgment in the history of consumer electronics. What if Nokia had launched its own touchscreen platform in 2004 when the prototype existed? What if leadership had trusted the internal warning instead of trusting the balance sheet? You can't rerun history, but you can watch what actually happened next, and it tells you everything about how fast an empire can slide. By 2010, the cracks are impossible to hide. Symbian feels ancient next to iOS. Android, Google's answer to the same shift, is spreading across manufacturers who move faster than Nokia can. The company brings in a new CEO, Stephen Elop, formerly of Microsoft, hoping outside eyes can fix an inside problem. In February 2011, Elop sends an internal memo to Nokia's employees that leaks almost immediately to the press. He compares the company to a man standing on a burning oil platform, forced to jump into freezing water because staying meant certain death. The memo becomes infamous. Nokia, Elop writes, has been standing on its own burning platform for a while, watching competitors leap ahead while the company debated internally. The memo wasn't wrong, it was just years too late. Nokia partners with Microsoft, betting the company's future on Windows Phone instead of Android. On paper, it's a reasonable move. In practice, it means abandoning Symbion's massive user base for a platform with almost no apps, no developer momentum, and no ecosystem to compete with iOS or Android's head start. You've probably noticed how much a product depends on the people around it, not just the product itself. A phone isn't just hardware, it's every app, every developer, every habit built around it. Nokia had the hardware. It never rebuilt the ecosystem in time. By 2013, Nokia's mobile phone division, once the single most dominant brand in the industry, sells to Microsoft for roughly $7 billion. Compare that to the company's peak market value near the mid-2000s, when Nokia alone was worth more than most entire national economies. The sale isn't really a sale, it's a funeral with paperwork. Here's the part that should sit with you a little longer than the rest. This wasn't a story about a company that failed to innovate. Nokia had the prototype. Nokia had the internal warning. Nokia had, arguably, years of head start on the exact idea that would define the next 2 decades of technology. The failure wasn't imagination, it was permission. Somewhere between the engineers who saw it coming and the executives who signed off on strategy, the idea got stuck. Too risky, too early, too disruptive to a business that was still, by every visible metric, winning. You do this too, in smaller ways, more often than you'd think. The instinct to protect what's working instead of risking what might work better isn't a corporate flaw, it's a human one. Nokia just did it on a stage large enough for the whole world to watch. So think about that drawer again. The old phone sitting in it isn't just an outdated device, it's evidence of a choice, made in a room you'll never see, by people who had every piece of information they needed and still chose the safer, slower path. The technology wasn't the problem. Nokia built the technology first. The problem was trusting it enough to bet the entire company on something that hadn't been proven yet by anyone else. Somewhere right now, there's a company sitting on its own version of that prototype, a feature nobody shipped, a shift somebody flagged in a meeting that got quietly tabled. And somewhere, right now, you're probably sitting on a version of that decision too. Not a company-ending one, a smaller one. The idea you've had for a while but keep telling yourself isn't quite ready. The thing you know is coming but haven't moved on yet. Because what you have now still, technically, works. Nokia's phone is in a drawer. The decision that put it there is still playing out, in rooms you'll never see, in choices you're making right now.